Hi, Carl here. I'm a game developer and I'd like to show you how we make games.
When we talk about game development, the first thing that comes to the mind of mga people is programmers. Actually, it turns out like majority of, like especially for AAA production, 20%, 30% yung actual game development. A lot of it is actually asset production. So that's where majority of the budget goes into as well. Game developers, usually yan yung mga programmers natin, technical artists, yung mga nag-integrate in, that works within Unity or Unreal. Then we would have our artists, meaning sila yung gumagawa ng assets for these game developers. So they make characters, creatures, yung mga modelers natin, sila yung gumagawa ng mga assets like yung trees, yung walls, yung environment, and then yung characters, and then we would have animators that bring life to those characters. So i-animate nila yun.
So the studio has different departments: modeling, art, animation, 2D art, game design, game development. Right now we're in the production area, so this is where everything starts from what the client requires, planning, baseline production. This is where we all meet and collaborate to start a new project or to work on projects. In pre-production, this is when you essentially start planning what the look and feel of the game is. We call it concept art, storyboarding, start creating the 2D concept. This is like the key art. So when you start game development, you first need to have game design. So we have here our designer. Essentially, he's in charge of creating the wireframes, all of the prototypes, all of the documentation related to the game. Mechanics as well, core mechanics. So you see here all of the references that we have, that we would essentially mechanics, different art, aesthetics. Finally, in the last leg of game design, you would need proof of concept. Proof of concept, or POC, is you would create a rough of the design or how you would essentially assemble it in a mind map. Then you have storyboarding and animation. So essentially, these guys are in charge of creating a 2D concept first. So when you create a 2D concept, this is when you essentially create the previs, the character design. So this is essentially illustration, so rough illustrations of different enemies, different characters. Then from there, we decide from what the final look would be for the character. Another example of pre-visualization is like animation, just illustration of different characters, character design yet again. So right now we're going to take a look at modeling, animation, and rigging. So we have here environment, essentially checking all of the models with relation to props, different shaders as well, different textures. So that's what's involved in terms of environment. And then we have here modeling for characters specifically. So there are a few tools that we use. We use ZBrush, Maya, Blender for the modeling of the characters. In terms of detailing, we use ZBrush, but it's also could be done in Blender and Maya. When you're creating games in production, and then from there you start modeling the characters, you start designing based on the 2D concept. And then from there, you start creating the code. So depending on the system architecture that you have decided, depending on the game design that you've decided during pre-prod, you would start creating that in production. So that's when you start coding different behaviors, different mechanics inside of the game. So if we go over here in the production area, so these guys are essentially responsible for applying all of the art assets and animation into the game engine. So this is also where we start doing the programming for the game. In game development, you have a team of programmers and you have a team of people, game developers as well, that essentially implements the art into the engine. They check for any issues, they check for any errors. That's the sort of stuff that we do. So here, you'll see how the process is for VFX. So So you see here the animation, the character swinging his sword, and the effects that happen on top of that inside of the game engine. You start integrating the art, the animation, and then the programming all together into one specific product, or a first vertical slice. So you have your programming, your 3D modeling, your animation, and then everything else in one layered cake. You would need to taste test your cake, meaning you would need to QA if it actually tastes good in the first place. So this is one example of how game developers would test their game inside of the game engine. So you see here, this is essentially Portrait. It's a mobile app. So meaning you would need to have a group of people or a section in your company or a group of friends just to test your game. If there's any bugs, let's say there's any visual glitches in the app if it's a mobile game, if there's any game-breaking issues, like for example exploits, like you can press a button or you do certain combinations in the game and it can break the game. Then lastly, the fourth section is publishing your game, shipping it. In my job, there's a lot of technicalities that you would need to know. So specifically as the chief of game development, I need to dabble a bit in terms of how modeling take that into account into game development, how I should test it, that sort of stuff. The job is very difficult because you would need to explore different areas as well. Aside from game development, I have a heavy programming background, but I need to dabble to art.
Game development jargons. Beta. Build of a game that's not finished yet, mostly play-tested with a large number of players. RPG. Role-playing game, a game genre where players take on the role of a fictional character and develop the character throughout the story and entirety of the game. AAA games made with big budgets, usually made by big companies with hundreds to thousands of developers. Indie short for independent individual game developer or small group of game developers. Prototype. A small, limited early version of a game or part of a game.
From start to finish, it really depends on the scope.
Actually, it heavily depends on what type of game we're working on. Typically, if we're talking about AAA productions, yung mga blockbuster hits, the games, that typically takes years. Like, give or take, it's 3 to 5 years in terms of production. So for a more similar or a smaller scale like double A's, typically around 2 to 3 years. I think it's like a safe estimate for a production.
So for AAA projects, it takes 3 to 5 years. In the next part of this episode, we will learn more about game development in the Philippines and why Filipinos are great game developers.